Good afternoon, and
Good
good evening.
evening, good evening, good evening.
Friends, thank you so much for joining us, but let's sort of get started with a couple of introductions. This is, as you know, debut broadcast on Black News USA for the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, and we have tonight maybe in a half hour, 45 minutes, perhaps not a whole hour, but we're using a, a medium that should give us in a week or so access to thousands of Baltimoreans, residents in the city, as well as anyone else who joins or connects to one of our destinations. And tonight, our destination is four destinations provided by our general manager and chief host, Donnie Glover. Donnie might join us a little later in the broadcast. But I would like to begin with the introductions of our vice president for the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, Minister Glenn Smith. Glenn, you want to open with a few words?
Good evening, everybody. Minister Glenn Smith, I'm vice president of Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. And we hope to bring you great information, not only on transit, but on housing, climate, a lot of different things that affect the people of Baltimore and around the country. So it's my pleasure to be here. And I want to thank Danny Glover for the opportunity for this program.
Thank you, Glenn. We have a special guest tonight with us, Mr. Timothy Bridges. Timothy Bridges is the co-founder of the Fayette Street Outreach, one of the more active community-based organizations in West Baltimore, but active in a number of areas, development, health, community associations, as sort of guides to families and communities. We'll let Tim Bridges tell us what he does in the Fayette Street Outreach. Timothy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Timothy Bridges. I serve as the vice president of the Fayette Street Outreach Community Association. I serve with our illustrious president, Ms. Esna Mans-Lake, and our treasurer, Mr. Sterling Brunson, and our secretary, Mr. Andre Lake. Our organization's been around since 1993, and we're in the area called Penrose Fayette Street Outreach, and that encompasses about 3,841 residents. And that also, we're close to the MARC train station and that MTA hub. So I just want to thank Sam Jordan and thank Minister Glenn Smith for being trailblazers and continuing to carry the mantle of this transit equity, because for so long it is unequal in certain parts of the city. And so I just want to commend them for their steadfast and really just taking the bull by the horn and continuing to sound the alarm that we need transportation, we need housing, we need redevelopment in some of these areas. And I just want to thank them for allowing me to represent our community tonight.
Thank you so much, Timothy. But you know, Baltimore Transit Equity has no intention of, in fact, it's going to be impossible for us to achieve our mission without the members and leaders of community associations all along the Red Line corridor and anywhere else in Baltimore where people are concerned about, one, transit equity, of course, but also the massive economic development that Baltimore needs. The Red Line, you'll see a banner soon that says, complete the Red Line. Well, we want to complete the Red Line because it was stolen from us June 25, 2015, when Governor Larry Hogan canceled it. We don't need to spend a lot of time on him tonight, but I can tell you that the Red Line project means 10,000 jobs, dramatically reduced commute times. Right now, 2 out of 3 jobs in this region cannot be reached under 90 minutes by public transportation. We call that transit detention. That means that rider, that person trying to get to work on time, is going to be captive 3 to 4 hours every day by a dysfunctional transportation system. They're not being paid for that time. And they're very concerned, of course, about getting to work on time. Almost 20% of our workforce goes to work an hour or an hour and a half early in order not to be late. We've asked M.MTA to estimate the loss that means to the economy. Our, what you might call a restaurant napkin calculation, is $375 million a year. We've asked M.MTA for what they think is an accurate number. Of course, they haven't tried. They would be blamed. Nevertheless, the Red Line Transit, the Red Line Light Rail project also brings $3 to $6.5 billion in transit-oriented development. No other mode can compare. No other mode attracts that kind of transit-oriented development. In fact, the way we put it is, banks don't invest in bus stops. And the mantra in the industry is development follows rail, buses follow development. But we're adding another now that we're getting closer to completing it and increasing our support for completing the Red Line, that the money follows the commitment. So this is also part of an attempt to make sure that our leadership in the city and the region are demonstrating and will demonstrate their commit to get this done. Senators Cardin and Van Hollen have introduced language in the Biden administration's infrastructure bill that says very simply, when Maryland gets its act together, or another way of saying commits to completing the Red Line, that money can be made available. So we want to make sure that's clear to everybody before the primary in June, so that all the candidates know that what we want, what we need in Baltimore is not just another bus project, throw a bus at it, don't spend a penny more, we'll talk about that, but rail that can anchor a bus system for the region, not just for the city. So I wanted to mention, because I had spoken with Timothy earlier today about another aspect of our work. We have developed a project, an important project. Maybe we need to get a lot more news about it from our outlets, but it shows how transit sector pollutants have impacted the health of so many communities, members of those communities, not only along the Red Line corridor, but throughout the city. We have some data we want to share with you, and a brief video, if we can make sure that our producer is going to give us a hand just to make sure it works. And then I want to speak with you, Timothy, about your what you think of that and how we might be able to discuss that further in Fayette Street communities, Fayette Street outreach communities. And Minister Smith has, of course, a lot to say, not only about that, but what we also need to do about the Highway to Nowhere. So let's try to get that video running, and we will do that right this moment. Yeah. Until now, no one has looked at the public transit in Baltimore through an equity and environmental health lens. When we did so with the scientific and technical assistance of the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School of Public Health, we saw lots of inequity along racial and ethnic lines, and lots of opportunity to better serve all the people in this city. I'm Samuel Jordan, president of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition, BTEC. We mapped 4 key metrics for Baltimore City: transit equity, social vulnerability, pollution, and health. In all the maps, a darker color indicates areas of greater need. When we mapped transit equity, we saw the patterns marking major differences between white and black residential areas. We also see opportunities to improve average commute time and the difference in commute time between those taking public transit and those using a personal vehicle. When we looked at social vulnerability, we again see racial differences emerge. The darker areas show neighborhoods whose residents are more likely to live in poverty or to be people of color. Looking at air pollution, we saw that areas close to the Patapsco River in the southeast had a higher burden of air pollution, possibly related to Baltimore's port industry emissions and the incinerator. When we looked at health outcomes related to air pollution, we saw again patterns indicating racial inequity. But downtown and areas along the water lit up as places for opportunities as well. To encourage investments in public transit, we overlaid all 4 maps to identify areas most in need of attention, equity, and investment. Let's work together to build a better Baltimore and connect those most in need of jobs, healthy food, education, and healthcare with exactly what they need through strategic investments in public transit. Okay, I hope that was clear enough. We're going to master the tech and even flow of all the materials we're working with. But Timothy, I just wanted to sort of pick up where we were discussing this topic earlier today. Is this an issue that you think we can introduce, or with your guidance, of course, what we're trying to do all along the corridor?
Absolutely. I really think that looking at transportation and looking at the inequity in some of these communities, it's very important that we be strategic about how we learn or teach other people, community residents, to be advocates, to advocate for themselves. Because again, it is a large focus of poverty in some of these communities. We have probably 300 plus vacant properties in our community, and most of them are owned by people that don't live in the city. And so when we talk about equity and taking renters to homeowners, and also that red line and that corridor is a big factor in jobs. And so that's one of the things we lack: jobs, adequate transportation, adequate housing, and then we have substance abuse and a food issue as well. And so I think all this plays a part in some of the things we've been continuing to do. So we continue to have our monthly community meetings, which is the 4th Tuesday of each month, and it's virtual now, but we bring in our elected officials. We bring in the planning department. We bring in people to encourage our community to get involved. And so this is right up the alley where now you're starting to see some reinvestment and some strategic dollars being maybe in these communities. So absolutely, we want to do our part to sound the alarm.
Mm-hmm. Minister Smith.
Sam, if I may, I wanted to bring back to Timothy's recollection of the community PACs that he was a part of. And we recently brought up a film that showed the work of the different PACs around the 19 different stations. And, you know, the atmosphere when the planning of the red line was being done was overwhelming. People had hope, and they were looking for change to happen for the better in Baltimore. Ada had been devastated by the highway to nowhere over 50 years ago. So, you know, I know Tim remembers. I mean, it was what do you call it, something in the air that, you know, hey, something was finally going to happen, and that Baltimore was going to West Baltimore was going to be prosperous again and come back into the glory of years past. So, Tim, thank you for being on that compact and the work that you did around the planning of the Red Line.
Yeah.
And
go ahead, Sam.
Timothy, we also want to get all of the original signatories of the Community Compact to redeclare their support for the completion of the Red Line Light Rail project. You see, after Governor Hogan canceled, so much confusion, so much misinformation began to spread all through the region. People weren't that clear about why, what happened. In fact, within hours of that cancellation, BTEC was formed. And one of our first tasks was to file a Title VI complaint against the governor and the state for that closure of the Red Line. That was his first chance, the governor's best chance to explain why he shut it down. He never did take advantage of that opportunity. In fact, his claim was that the Red Line was a wasteful boondoggle. But there is no study, no analysis, no report from his office, from his departments, anyone else to substantiate that claim. That's what we call Hogan's big lie. It's almost as if he's repeating over and over and over again that the 2020 elections were fraudulent, a big lie. Well, he's got his own, but he says it over so often that many people believe it without any documentation. And that's one of the things that we're declaring. If anyone says the Red Line is too expensive, we challenge them. Where's your proof? You know, the election proof question went to the Supreme Court 60 times, never sustained by any argument that would make any difference in a court of law, where the facts should be shown, if there are any. We're going to talk, Glenn, and we want to make sure that you and Timothy speak about things as you wish along the corridor, but I want to give you another reason why I asked that question about the environment, about transit sector generated pollutants. We have another little clip to show you. We're going to share our screen. Just this headline. Do you see that headline?
It's not on the screen, no.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah, we see it now.
All right. There is a connection. Baltimore, of course, is the queen city of redlining. 1910, 1911, Baltimore was the first jurisdiction in this country to legally enforce racially sensitive, racially targeted mortgages, home loans, any attempt by people of color to live outside of isolated areas. Red for hazardous, that's where lenders were advised never to invest. There was blue for getting there, not quite, but perhaps improving. Green meant this is a white neighborhood and your investments are safe. And yellow means that it's on the decline. Don't risk your money there either. But the redlining means something else, and that's why that headline. Redlining also means that 45 million Americans, mostly people of color, are breathing dirtier air 50 years after it ended. we wanted to make sure that you could see the connection where we haven't quite defeated and we haven't quite addressed all of the problems created during this period of redlining. And it comes down to this for so much. Where there's structural racism, we've got to make structural change. That's one reason we seek the completion of the Red Line Light Rail project, and the reason we seek to replace the MDOT MTA model, the author of race-based transit policy for the last 7 years, with what we call a Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority. We'll speak a little bit more about that. But I do want Minister Smith to kind of elaborate on this idea of a Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority.
Well, Sam, if we look at the past, especially the past 6 years, there have been no improvements to Baltimore's transit system. After the cancellation of the Red Line, there was instituted what they call Baltimore Link. I think they spent maybe $235,000, which was supposed to be an improvement over transportation and a substitute for the Red Line to improve commute times, and it never did. It so confused the community when they launched the Baltimore Link. You had people that were retiring from work because they could no longer get to work, catching the buses that they used to catch, and in most cases, catching one bus. Now they were forced to catch two, and in some cases, three buses. If Baltimore is to be the city that it needs to be, and if you look around the country, no country transit system is anchored by a bus system. You know that we are behind the times. At one time, with the streetcar system that we had in Baltimore, we were ahead of the country as far as transit and transportation went. So in order for Baltimore to realize its potential, it must have decision making over the transportation system that in this city. It's a no-brainer. If the state is the one that's running our system, they're not focused on what we really need. MTA doesn't do the studies it needs to do to find out where people need to go. So with a Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority, there will be a commission of 15 people that come from different sectors of business, transit advocates, who knows what's needed in Baltimore City. So that's the major reason we need to control our own transit system, is because we know what we need. We don't need people who sometimes never ridden a bus in their life to make transit decisions for us. So BTEX saw the need, and we said, in order for Baltimore to be the major city that it needs to be, we have to control getting people from to work, to health appointments, to food access. And the only way to do that is with a robust multimodal system that is anchored by light rail.
I think you're on mute, Sam.
Sam, you're mute.
We want to make sure that our audience knows precisely the impact that a lack of investment in transit, a lack of investment in health, a lack of investment in mitigating pollutants, the presence of what we call social vulnerability, what that has meant to communities along in the city. So we have a sort of a map as part of our study that shows which communities are most vulnerable and need the most investments, that is support by rail and support by investments, not only in transit equity, but in economic development as well. Let me show you, let's share that now. Can you see that map?
Yes.
Okay. Timothy, you
Yes.
see where
Yes.
you see where you might find your own neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
It's, well, take a look. Where the colors are darkest,
Yep.
that's where we know the most development efforts must be made. The red line is without question a major factor in that development. So you can see, for example, in the middle on the left in that map,
Mm-hmm.
the communities there not only include Fayette Street area, but Carrollton Ridge, Franklin Square, Franklin Town Road, Harlan Park, Midtown Edmondson, uh, Rosemount, Sandtown Winchester. We know these communities. They're West Baltimore communities that have been left behind without the investments that they need. The red line is not a fantasy of the Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition. We now have the data that says exactly where these communities are that need the most. And you can see that area, that middle circle on the left, and then the circle on the right, right next to it in East Baltimore. That's why the Red Line Corridor from Bayview in the east to Woodlawn CMS in the west is just what our planning for 13 years was meant to address. Larry Hogan knew exactly the kind of impact the Red Line Light Rail project would have on Baltimore. So we're going to ask you and others along the corridor to help us organize and make sure that the voices of people who are not often asked for their opinions determine what happens next. And that's simply not asking folks like Minister Smith mentioned, who are making decisions about public transportation and have never ridden, never used public transportation. We want an attitude, a fight. It's almost like a freedom fight, but we have to see it. And we have to know that we can win. Our mission is to build and lead an informed but resolute regional constituency that will demand and pursue the completion of the Red Line Light Rail project, because we see Baltimore, that includes its communities, not only those along the Red Line corridor, but Baltimore among the leading cities of the nation when it can offer an equitable, reliable, multimodal transportation system for the region anchored by light rail. And that's exactly what we intend to do with your help and the help of community associations all along the corridor and elsewhere throughout the city.
Yeah. So I'm glad, looking at the information that you presented, one of the things that, again, that was a hit in the stomach to take the red line out of the momentum that was built. And I would just say that our communities are resilient, because one of the things is that when you look at those maps, you can see the inequity in the community. You can see where targeted strategic planning to hold back resources, and the people are still resilient. And so for us, even Fair Street Outreach, that was major for us. We were a strong and strong attendance at those SAC meetings. We were always there meeting with community members, and people were excited. And so what we did after that punch in the stomach from our inadequate governor, we went back and we started working on developing our community center. Because again, in order to get a message out, you need some place to get a message out. And so, and also you have to be in the trenches serving the people. And so we opened our community center up in 2018. And now, since COVID, we've been doing COVID vaccines once a month. So we just figure out another way to serve our people. And so I think one of the things that I'm hearing is that it's very important for people to understand what is at stake. And I think for so many, they don't understand that because they've never been included in these conversations. And now it's the opportunity for redevelopment, because it's blatant that racism, structural racism, has caused this decay in so many communities that now the focus is on. And so I applaud you all for continuing to be heard and to make it emphasis on how you can bring back the momentum. And so it's about building the momentum.
I want to make sure that our audience understands a term you've used several times, SACs. That's SAAC, Station Area Advisory Committees. What many don't know, perhaps didn't experience, and may not have known firsthand, is that for that 13-year period from 2002 to 2015, hundreds of members of communities all along that corridor participated in the planning. About 50, 75 people traveled to other cities to see transit authorities, transit systems, Seattle, Portland, Denver, Charlotte, Boston, to make sure that we had best practices, and we knew we did. That's how the Red Line was fully funded, fully approved, because of the work of hundreds of Baltimoreans working with agency personnel, consultants, but they got the work done. And around each of those station areas, there are 19 stations along that 14.2 mile track of the Red Line from Bayview in the east to Woodlawn CMS in the west. And at least 16 of them developed SAC sketches and plans. Baltimore Transit Equity Coalition is working out an arrangement with the design center of the architects down on Charles and Fayette to have a public exhibit of these SAC plans so that they can see that this is not just a dream. This is what people decided is what they needed to make life livable, breathable, walkable, and workable for communities and anyone else living within 15 minutes walk of a transit hub along the Red Line light rail corridor. That's who will benefit from the kind of changes that are immediately anticipated when the Red Line system is built. So we're going to close. I want to make sure our audience knows that we're glad to make this first broadcast. Thanks again to Donnie Glover, Black News USA, for letting us use that broadcast system for tonight's program. We'll be back next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. As we get used to the tech, we have great help from David Lovelace. We call him Chap, but it'll be smoother, and it will be better, of course. But the emphasis is on the information that we can share. So let me let our guests have a few words, and then Minister Smith can close us out.
I just want to say, Minister Glenn had mentioned something about early on. We had developed an idea, um, different communities, about this impact fund for our
Yes,
community, because one of the things is that we recognize that we have not had adequate resources in our community, and we understand that we have limited fresh food places to shop or markets, and we recognize that we have a high number of vacant properties, and then that leads to a lot of the substance abuse and
yes,
also drug uh, addiction. And so one of the things is that, and I believe that we can get a couple of things accomplished at one time, is that we need to reinvest in our human stock, um, our folks that are out on the corner, that we need to have an option. And so we need to work hard to reestablish the information and also with some application, because we absolutely need to be able to take our human stock in our communities and give them the tools they need to start thinking about moving forward. And so this is what Fair Street Outreach is doing now. And we're doing after school programming, we're doing job readiness, we're trying to teach our babies how to read. And so it's very important that we look to ourselves. We can solve this problem.
yes, we
Uh,
can.
we need to be talking about this transportation all the time. And so, just like the Montgomery bus boycott, they were able to get the attention because it was an issue. And so, we shouldn't sell ourselves short. We need to be having a conversation about, and that's our main conversation, is that we understand that our community has had less resources. Now we're strategic in how we're asking and how we're building our community. So we don't want to keep relying on people to give us. We want to be able to do things and create ways that we can uplift our community. And so one of the things that we're looking to do, because we have a legacy, these organizations that are here out here, some of them don't have the tools. And so we're looking to figure out a way to get endowments to these community associations so they don't have to keep begging, asking for money. Each of these communities, what if they had $1 million endowment? What could they do in their community? So I'll leave with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy. Minister Smith.
Yes, I'd like to end by assuring Mr. Michael Haney, who asked how we will ensure that the Black community is involved in the transit-oriented development that comes with light rail, and perhaps that's a lead into our next segment that we do. But we have to be on top of it. We have to demand transparency in the process. We have to build strong SACs again. The community was very much involved the last time in the planning of the Red Line. So we have to make sure that the community is brought to the table and that they have decision making. And the Baltimore Regional Transportation Authority will help to ensure that. So, Mr. Haney, we hear you. And I think that next time, maybe that will be one of the topics of our next segment.
Very
Sam, good night.
Thank you so much. Have a fine evening for the two of you.
Are we gone?
Thank
You
you.
have one thing to say before we leave?
No, here we are.
We're out.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate
Thank
y'all having me on.